Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member McCaskill, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, not only for being here, but for your service. And I hope, I will just add my comments to the Chair and Ranking Member. Please thank all the men and women who you lead as well for their service. Director Travers, I wanted to start with a question to you. The administration has talked quite a lot about decimating ISIS and destroying its safe haven in Syria and Iraq. With that said, I'm concerned that ISIS and its so-called caliphate aren't as devastated as we might think they are. In August, DoD reported that ISIS currently has more than 30,000 fighters across Syria and Iraq, a number that was reinforced by the UN's ISIS monitoring body. And just last week, the Institute for the Study of War, a nonpartisan think tank, released a new study entitled ISIS Second Resurgence that argued that ISIS is reconstituting its forces in Syria and Iraq and is using those 30,000 plus fighters to raise funds and reassert control over key swaths of land. These reports are obviously very concerning, especially since at this time 2 years ago, ISIS's ranks were being eroded on a daily basis. The terror group was being evicted from Mosul, and allied forces were beginning to encircle ISIS's last stronghold in Raqqa. If we have failed to finish the job of crushing ISIS, as these reports suggest, then a reconstituted ISIS safe haven in Iraq and Syria will threaten not only the region but the U.S. homeland by giving the groups area from which they can plot and direct attacks against Americans. So, Director Travers, how do you square the reports I've just mentioned with your testimony that really says that the administration we're in the final stages of defeating ISIS? Does ISIS currently have 30,000 or more fighters in Iraq and Syria?
These numeric estimates are low confidence, to be sure. There is no question that ISIS has taken huge hits. 95+% of the territory they once held, they no longer hold. There are some small pockets in the Euphrates Valley. There are some fighters in Idlib, to be sure. The key is to keep pressure on them, without a doubt. The key is to be thinking longer term in terms of Sunni disenfranchisement, because we could be replaying the same problem that we had from several years ago. We saw them several years ago begin to be thinking about how to implement an insurgency strategy, and they're burrowing down, and we certainly see this throughout Iraq and Syria. And so if we don't keep pressure on them, and if we don't address the problems of disenfranchisement, we should expect to see problems in the future.
Well, thank you for that, and I'd look forward to working with you and your team because I just think we have to keep the pressure on, and we can't act as if the problem has gone away, because it hasn't. Director Wray, one truly emerging threat that I don't believe we're effectively grappling with is the threat of deep fakes, or the use of video editing practices enhanced by artificial intelligence to create convincing video impersonations of public figures and government officials. While impersonations and video editing have existed for years, these practices have never achieved truly convincing impersonations. Now that appears to have changed as these technologies have both become more precise and much more accessible. The result is that the old adage of the camera never lies may no longer be true. The use of deep fakes for national security purposes would be a nightmare. Imagine deepfakes being used to make it look like a Secretary of Defense would no longer back an ally or would threaten imminent action against a rival. This false rhetoric could trigger mass protests or instability in regions, force impulsive reactions from countries who fall for the ruse, and cause massive shifts in stock markets across the world. So, Director, can you please share with us how the FBI is seeking to adapt to the emergency of low-cost deep fakes, and what steps you're taking to prevent deep fakes from being used to undermine U.S. national security?
Well, Senator, I think you're exactly right that it's a topic of great concern. We have a number of our science and technology folks burrowing in on this issue. There's probably more that could be discussed in a different setting than say, this one. But I do think it illustrates a broader problem, which is every time we have some great new technology, I have two reactions. One is, wow, that's awesome. I can't believe we can do that.
Right.
And then, oh my God, I can't believe they can do that.
Right.
And this is a great example of that.
Well, thank you. And I would also, we'll follow up with writing with you, just want to make sure that you all have the authorities and the tools that the FBI needs to better address and prevent deepfakes. So we'll follow up with you on that. Another question for you, Director Wray, which I hope will be a quick one. Last May, during an interview, President Trump stated that the FBI's senior leadership was composed of, quote, several rotten apples, close quote. Can you please just answer me yes or no? Do you agree with the President that there are rotten apples within the Bureau's senior leadership?
Well, Senator, I can only tell you about the FBIC, which is people of great courage, integrity, and professionalism. And I have now met with the offices representing every state of the senators up on this dais, and they are extraordinary people that this committee and all Americans should be proud of.
Thank you very much. And I would agree with that. My honor of getting to know some of the FBI folks in New Hampshire has been a true honor. So, Secretary Nielsen, I wanted to touch on one last issue with you to follow up on your testimony before his GAC last May. At that hearing, I asked you about the capacity for the United States to conduct inspections of traffic leaving the U.S. and heading southbound into Mexico. As you know, as part of the Merida Initiative, the U.S. has pledged to increase southbound inspections in order to stem the flow of guns and money from the U.S. into Mexico that help fuel violence and empower the Mexican drug cartels. And I'll note that it's my understanding that we are seeing fentanyl not only come into the country through our mail, but come in through Mexican cartels, and that there's some evidence that cartels are beginning to manufacture fentanyl as well. However, when I visited both the southern border and Mexico last spring, I was surprised to see little southbound inspection at the land ports of entry, and my Mexican interlocutors consistently raised this with me during my meetings in Mexico City. At the May hearing, you pledged to investigate the current capability of the United States to conduct robust southbound inspections and to work with this committee to address gaps in these inspections. Realizing I'm out of time, I'll ask that we follow up on the record of this, but I'll ask that you update us on your assessment of our southbound inspections.
And if I could just really quickly say, yes, ma'am, we have done that. I've had no less than a dozen conversations with Mexican counterparts, current and in the future, Lopez Obrador administration. Happy to come brief you. We have a lot of good news there on how we're increasing capacity.
Great, thank you. Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Jones.
Chair.